In the glittering chaos of 1982, Blondie was more than a band. They were a cultural supernova. Having clawed their way out of New York's gritty punk scene, they had conquered the world, selling over 40 million albums and etching their sound into the very fabric of the era. But just as their light burned its brightest, the entire universe they had built began to collapse in on itself. In a terrifyingly short span of just 6 months, everything fell apart. Chris Stein, the band's guitarist and Debbie Harry's creative soulmate, was being consumed by a mysterious illness that left doctors utterly baffled. Their latest album, once anticipated, had crash-landed with a thud so loud it threatened to end their careers for good. But the public story was only a shadow of the truth. Years later, Debbie Harry would finally pull back the curtain on what truly destroyed the band that fateful summer. It wasn't just the sickness, the financial ruin, or the drugs. It was a betrayal so profound it would take 15 years for the wounds to even begin to scar over. To understand the rupture, you must first understand the secret that shaped Debbie Harry from her first breath. She was born Angela Trimble on July 1st, 1945, the daughter of a love that was tragically out of time. A reunion between childhood sweethearts, one of whom was now married to someone else. In the rigid moral landscape of post-war America, a single mother faced an impossible choice. Just 3 months after her birth, Angela's mother gave her up for adoption. But 3 months is an eternity to an infant. It's long enough to memorize a mother's voice, her scent, the very rhythm of her heartbeat. That primal connection, once severed, left a void. Debbie would later describe this foundational loss as a kind of invisible fog that trailed her throughout her life, a trauma buried too deep to be fully understood, yet too present to ever be ignored. Adopted by Richard and Catherine Harry, a conservative couple from Hawthorne, New Jersey, she was given a new name and a new life inside a modest house filled with rules and expectations. Her parents, who owned a small gift shop, envisioned a conventional path for their daughter. School, marriage, a quiet life settled nearby. But from her earliest memories, she felt a fundamental disconnect. Their world was predictable and calm. Her inner world was a symphony of color, noise, and restless movement. Just across the bridge lay New York City, a vibrant, chaotic metropolis that she could feel calling to her like a distant song. When she was 4, her parents gently told her she was adopted, framing it as something that made her special. But the word special soon gave way to deeper, more complex questions. Who was her birth mother? Why had she been given away? These unanswered questions sent her spiraling into a world of fantasy. She began to imagine herself as the secret daughter of Marilyn Monroe, seeing in the iconic actress a kindred spirit, someone who wore their pain like silk, someone beautiful but fractured in ways the world could never fully see. It was a mirror reflecting her own burgeoning sense of being an outsider. That feeling was magnified at school, where her natural red hair made her a target for bullies. At 14, tired of the relentless teasing, she reached for a bottle of bleach. The transformation into a blonde wasn't just about vanity. It was an act of deliberate self-creation. She was building a new persona, someone untouchable, someone who could not be hurt. But beneath that carefully constructed armor, a quiet, gnawing fear took root, planted by disturbing childhood experiences, a man exposing himself to her, a teenager stalking her home, that taught her the world was a predatory place. She knew then, with absolute certainty, that she was not built for the quiet desperation of suburbia. She was destined for the roar of the city.
Manhattan in 1965 was a world away from the manicured lawns of Hawthorne, and for a 20-year-old Debbie Harry, it was a baptism by fire. She arrived with little more than a dream of becoming an artist and plunged headfirst into the city's chaotic, unforgiving energy. Survival became a relentless hustle, a series of jobs that were less a career path and more a crash course in resilience. By day, she sat behind a desk as a secretary at the BBC's New York office, a picture of professional composure. But when night fell, she transformed entirely, go-go dancing inside cages at a club in Union City for $50 a night, a grueling, sometimes humiliating job that taught her how to own a room even when it felt hostile. A year later, she landed a waitressing job at Max's Kansas City, which wasn't just a bar, it was the very epicenter of New York's Cultural Revolution. In the famous back room, Andy Warhol held court, surrounded by a whirlwind of artists, drag queens, and musicians who were actively dismantling the old rules of art and identity. Debbie served them drinks, soaking in their conversations, their radical fashion, and their unapologetic attitude. She wasn't just watching the scene. She was becoming a part of it, learning a new language of self-expression that was miles away from the hymns she sang in her church choir back home. Her first real foray into music came in 1967 with Wind in the Willows, a psychedelic folk band with a dreamy, eclectic sound. They were signed to Capitol Records and released an album, but it vanished almost without a trace, and the band dissolved just as quickly. Still, the experience was invaluable. It was her first time in a professional studio, her first lesson in how to command a microphone and control her voice. That same year, during the Summer of Love, she took LSD in Central Park, an experience she later described as cracking her brain open, rewiring her entire perception of art and life. The true catalyst for her future arrived in 1973, when she joined the Stilettos, a theatrical, gloriously messy punk cabaret act that felt more like performance art than a concert. It was in that whirlwind of raw energy that she met Chris Stein, a quiet, observant art student who played guitar for the band. He was instantly captivated by her magnetic stage presence. They discovered a shared obsession with horror movies and all things strange, and an unbreakable bond was forged. They became an inseparable creative force, their connection so deep it would outlast love, fame, and near-fatal illness. By 1974, the internal drama of the Stilettos reached a breaking point, and Debbie and Chris walked away to forge their own path. The early days were a brutal fight for survival. Debbie even took a job as a Playboy Bunny to pay the bills, learning to deflect awful comments with a smile, a skill that built the thick skin she would need for the rest of her life. It was during this period that things got darker. Like many in their scene, they fell into heroin addiction, a habit that crept in with the stress and the instability of their lives. At one point, Debbie was so broke, the IRS seized her clothes to pay off her debts. Yet through it all, they clung to each other, eventually pulling themselves out of the addiction's grip. They knew that to build something lasting, they had to get clean first. They started a new band, first called Angel and the Snake, before finally landing on a name that would become legendary: Blondie. Just as their star was beginning to rise, Blondie was invited to open for Iggy Pop on his 1977 Idiot Tour, a gig that put them on the same stage as David Bowie, who was playing keyboards in the background. For Debbie, this wasn't just another tour, it was a masterclass in stage presence. Night after night, she watched Bowie command the energy of an entire arena from behind his keyboard. A quiet, coiled power that was mesmerizing. She studied his cool, detached style, his ability to own a stage without begging for its attention, and she absorbed it into her own performance. That tour became her classroom, shaping the iconic, effortlessly cool persona that would soon captivate the world. In September 1978, Blondie released an album that no one saw coming, Parallel Lines. It wasn't just a record, it was a sonic shockwave. Produced by Mike Chapman, a hitmaker known for his polished work with glam rock stars, the album was sharp, sleek, and dangerously infectious. The raw energy of their punk roots was still there, but it was now encased in a shimmering, radio-friendly armor. The result was an explosion. The album sold over 20 million copies worldwide, a staggering number that was virtually unheard of for a band born from the anti-commercial ethos of the CBGB punk scene. It shot to #1 in the UK and went platinum in the US, transforming them from a cult favorite into global superstars almost overnight. The engine behind this meteoric rise was a single, revolutionary track that almost tore the band apart, Heart of Glass. a shimmering, hypnotic blend of punk attitude and a pulsating disco beat. The song was an unstoppable force. It soared to #1 on the Billboard Hot 100 and dominated charts across Europe, selling over 1.3 million copies in the UK alone. But inside the band, its success felt like a betrayal. Some members were horrified, feeling they had sold out their punk principles for a sound they despised. The internal conflict was so intense, it nearly fractured the group for good. Yet the public couldn't get enough. The song was a masterpiece of perfect timing and audacious risk-taking, an anthem so iconic it would later be inducted into the Grammy Hall of Fame and ranked among the greatest songs ever written by Rolling Stone. Just days before Parallel Lines dropped, Blondie played a show at London's Hammersmith Odeon. Tickets were just $3, and fans had camped out for days to get a spot. The energy was chaotic and electric. The band could barely make it through their set as fans swarmed the stage again and again, desperate to get closer to Debbie. That night was the last moment of calm before the hurricane of fame hit them at full force. A raw, unforgettable snapshot of a band on the absolute verge of immortality. But as Debbie Harry's face became one of the most famous in the world, the crown of fame began to feel heavy. At 32, she was labeled the most beautiful woman in punk, but the media's gaze was often shallow and reductive. Interviewers, mostly men, would gawk and stumble over their questions, more interested in her looks than her lyrics, treating her like a beautiful object rather than the architect of her own sound. This frustrating, isolating experience was a constant reminder that no matter how big Blondie became, the industry was still not ready for a woman who was in complete, unapologetic control of her own power. She wasn't just a singer, she was a warrior, and her biggest battles were just beginning.
In the summer of 1982, Blondie embarked on the Tracks Across America tour, opening for the new pop sensation Duran Duran. On paper, it should have been a triumphant victory lap, a passing of the torch from one iconic band to the next. But behind the curtain, a quiet and terrifying nightmare was unfolding. Chris Stein was visibly wasting away. A mysterious illness was consuming him from the inside out, causing him to lose weight at an alarming rate and leaving him unable to swallow solid food. He was surviving on a diet of tofu ice cream while a revolving door of doctors remained utterly baffled by his condition. The immense stress of watching his partner and creative soulmate deteriorate pushed both him and Debbie deeper into the numbing embrace of heroin, a desperate attempt to medicate the fear and the gnawing uncertainty. On stage, the cracks were no longer just visible, they were gaping wounds. More than once, Chris collapsed during a performance, the physical toll of his illness becoming impossible to hide. By their final show in Philadelphia on August 21st, the band was a ghost of its former self, playing to a half-empty arena. The electrifying energy that had once defined them had vanished, replaced by a palpable sense of exhaustion and despair. The tour that was meant to solidify their legacy instead became their funeral procession. Adding to the disaster was their latest album, The Hunter, released that May. It was a commercial and critical catastrophe. The magic, once so potent, was gone. Critics were merciless, and fans were confused by its disjointed, experimental sound. The lead single barely made a dent in the charts, and the reviews were brutal. While Chris would later defend the record, even their powerhouse drummer Clem Burke admitted they had simply lost the plot. But the sickness and the failure were only the most visible symptoms of a much deeper decay. A poison had been seeping into the band's foundations for years. Back in 1981, guitarist Frank Infante had filed a lawsuit against the band, claiming he was being excluded from the creative process and cheated out of royalties. Though the case was settled quietly, it left a scar that never healed, planting a deep-seated mistrust that festered within the group. This lingering bitterness would erupt spectacularly later years at their 2006 Rock and Roll Hall of Fame induction.
When Infante confronted Debbie on stage, demanding to know why he wasn't allowed to perform, she stared him down and delivered a cold, final verdict. "Can't you see my real band is up there?" The raw, uncomfortable moment laid bare the old wounds for the world to see, revealing that the betrayals of 1982 had never truly been forgiven. With Chris's health in a terrifying freefall, the planned European tour for the Hunter was canceled. He was finally diagnosed with pemphigus vulgaris, a rare and excruciatingly painful autoimmune disease that causes the skin to blister and peel away. He was hospitalized for months, and Debbie never left his side. In a desperate act of love and mercy, she secretly administered heroin to him in the hospital to ease his unbearable pain, a choice so desperate that no one on the hospital staff dared to intervene. With no tour money coming in and the medical bills spiraling into an abyss, the financial pressure became immense. On November 1st, 1982, the official announcement came. Blondie was over. It wasn't a single event, but a perfect storm of devastating illness, crippling addiction, commercial failure, and a profound, lingering betrayal. The band that had defined an era was gone.
For 15 years, the name Blondie was a memory, a ghost of the New York scene that had long since faded into rock and roll lore. But in 1997, after years of silence, separate careers, and profound healing, something shifted. Debbie Harry and Chris Stein, their bond having miraculously outlasted a near-fatal illness and the implosion of their band, reached out to the original members, Clem Burke, Jimmy Destry, and even Gary Valentine. No one, perhaps not even them, truly expected the old magic to return. The music industry had changed, they had all aged, and the wounds of the past were deep. But when they stepped back into a room together, something undeniable sparked back to life. In 1999, they unleashed No Exit, an album that was not just a comeback, it was a defiant resurrection. The lead single, Maria, a soaring, anthemic rock track, defied all commercial expectations. It went straight to #1 in the UK and topped the charts in 14 different countries. At 54 years old, Debbie Harry's voice hadn't aged a day. If anything, it was sharper, more knowing, imbued with the weight of everything she had endured. The album shot to #3 in the UK, and suddenly, Blondie, a band once thought buried in the annals of time, was everywhere again, proving that true icons never really fade away. But the full story, the one hidden behind the platinum records and the carefully constructed rock and roll persona, had yet to be told. In 2019, Debbie Harry's memoir Face It dropped a series of bombshells, revealing with brutal honesty the traumas she had carried in silence for decades. She wrote with a chilling, almost detached clarity about a night in 1973, long before the fame, when armed men broke into her New York apartment. She and Chris Stein were tied up as their instruments and camera gear were stolen. But what followed was far worse. One of the robbers sexually assaulted her at knife point. In the aftermath, her description of the event was not a cry for help, but a statement of pure, hardened survival. "The stolen guitars hurt me more." That single, shocking sentence hung in the air, a testament to the emotional armor she had been forced to build long before the world ever knew her name. Even more disturbing was an encounter from a year earlier, in 1972. Stranded in Manhattan, tired and trying to get to an after-hours club, she accepted a ride from a stranger in a small white car. The moment the door closed, a primal fear seized her. There were no handles, no window cranks. The inside was completely sealed. She was trapped. Somehow, she never explained exactly how, she managed to escape. Years later, in 1989, when the face of the executed serial killer Ted Bundy was plastered across every television screen, she froze. It was him. Same face, same car, same bone-deep chill down her spine. While authorities have questioned the timeline, the specific details she remembered matched things only Bundy's victims could have known. Whether or not it was truly him, she was certain of what she had survived. In 2014, she decided it was time to break another silence. For decades, fans had speculated about her sexuality. When asked directly if she was bisexual, she answered casually, yes. She spoke of finding women more sensual and explained that she never had strict requirements in her partners. She just wanted someone kind and funny. But this wasn't about shock value. It was about claiming her full identity. She spoke of feeling entitled to be the man she wanted to be, not in gender, but in ambition, in attitude, and in her complete refusal to apologize for her presence. Alongside pioneers like Patti Smith and Chrissie Hynde, she wasn't just a female frontwoman, she was a force that never asked for permission. That same unbreakable spirit fueled Blondie's 11th studio album, Pollinator, released in 2017 when Debbie was 72. Instead of fading into legacy, she collaborated with a new generation of artists like Sia and Johnny Marr, proving her relevance was timeless. The album hit number 4 in the UK, its message now turned outward. She became a fierce advocate for environmental causes, using her platform to fight for the survival of bee populations, seeing in their struggle a reflection of our own. It was the same grit, the same raw determination that had carried her through the darkest corners of fame, trauma, and betrayal, but now that power was being used to fight for the world. She had survived it all, emerging not just as a rock star, but as a force of nature that refused to be silenced.